And Art Peterson's a fan. You're what? Okay. Hello.
Hi. For the record, Abby Willard, Vermont Agency of Agriculture, Food and Markets. I'm joined here with my colleague Gina, and I thought that I can offer just a little bit of background about the Farm to School program, and then hoped that it made sense to have Gina come and talk as the program manager about the evolution of the program and more of the details of how Farm to School grants currently are structured and eligibility within the agency. Does that sound like a good
Yes.
plan? Great. So Farm to School started with the Rosa McLaughlin Act back in 2017. So our agency's been managing granting programs since then. And I think Gina can talk to sort of like the collective impact of the granting program and how it's evolved over time since then. But a piece that sort of remained consistent over the years, if you're not familiar with the Farm to School granting program, is that we kind of refer to it as the 3 Cs, that it has components of the cafeteria, classroom, and the community as ways to both work on feeding and educating kids with an economic development outcome for our farms. So more local food being procured, market opportunities for our farmers, connecting students to where their food comes from the food side. And then from the classroom engagement level, there's opportunities for farmers to come into the school. There's opportunities for students and classrooms to go do site visits on farms, opportunity for kids to try new foods through taste testing or exposure to like different meal creations. And then just learning about agriculture as part of their community and culture. And then something we've worked on in the last couple of years has really been about workforce development opportunities. So again, Farm to School has always worked really well for younger grades because they're really curious and open to trying new things more typically than the older group, but recognizing that Farm to School is also a real pipeline to help create kind of knowledge about what an agricultural field and career might look like, whether on a farm or related to the associated services that support agriculture in the state, and how can we help build that kind of pipeline of next farmers and next viable farm workers or ag industry workers. I think some of the outcomes that I think of from the big picture perspective are that when kids have tried new foods, in school, they often bring those changes home to their home eating. And so they talk about something that they tried at school that then they are asking their parents to consider cooking at home. And then, and Gina and I have laughed about this, that this is almost kind of like Gina's like the living example of this, that if you were exposed to the Farm to School culture as a youth, you then used that experience to oftentimes guide your eating experiences and then your expectations when you went to college. And that really, again, blossomed into what is a larger farm to institution movement in Vermont. So not just in the K through 12 school, but also in college settings where we've definitely seen in the last, 15 years, college students really guiding and directing the local purchasing that happens on college campuses based upon a lot of the experiences that they had in their elementary years and secondary education time. Related to some of the pieces that may come up around the H550 discussion, many of our Farm to School programs have started with a champion. So like one person that's really impassioned about one aspect of Farm to School. So either they really want to connect kids to farms or morning or afternoon. They may really be interested about, curriculum pieces that are connected to agriculture, or, really want to think about how do we teach about food and the history of agriculture in our classrooms. Farm to School has a really solid start in the history of Vermont and then has really resonated throughout the region and the country. I think Vermont had one of the strongest and earliest Farm to School programs, and it actually ended up being a model for the U.S. Department of Agriculture Farm to School program, which was, has become resources for other states and also been resources here in Vermont. And I think one of the last things I would offer is that the kind of, again, from the bigger picture perspective, the Farm to School program has really been about building continuity, or the granting program has been about building continuity across community throughout Vermont's counties, and doing what we can to really develop this school culture and community around food and Farm to School. You will have an opportunity during Farm to School Awareness Day in a couple weeks on February 8th to have testimony and hear from school officials and farmers and other kind of players within the Farm to School network. So another opportunity to talk about kind of like the collective impact of the program and the work statewide. So more opportunities, I think, next month as well. I welcome Gina to come up and introduce herself and the program if that feels like the next best thing.
Yeah, before you do that, just
Yeah.
can you tell us, just maybe not critical that we know necessarily today, but in terms of budget for next year?
Yes, so the Farm to School program is funded at the level base funding of $500,000 for fiscal year 25. So that's what's in the governor's recommend currently, which is what it has been for the last 2 years. Last year was the first year, or the second year.
Yes.
Yeah, so 2 years prior. So beginning in fiscal year 23, it was the base funding.
Okay, good. Yes, thank you. Then why don't we have Gina?
Sure. Great.
So for the record, I'm Gina Clitheroe, Agency of Agriculture Food and Markets. I'm our Farm to Institution Program Manager. And thanks for having me. So I'd like to just start off by giving a little bit of the overview of the grants program and then kind of respond to a couple of the questions that I heard and listening to the testimony that has happened and the discussion that's happened in committee over the last couple of weeks. So as Abby indicated, the Farm to School and Early Childhood Program at the Agency of Agriculture was created in 2007 with the passage of the Rosa McLaughlin Farm to School Act. And the agency awards and administers grants to schools, early childhood providers, and nonprofits through a competitive award process on an annual basis. Since 2006, 266 grants have been awarded, $1.9 million has been invested, and we've reached 140 schools and 143 early childhood centers in that time. The overarching kind of goal of the program is to improve the health, nutrition, and learning outcomes for students and children, integrate interdisciplinary agricultural education into Vermont classrooms, connect kids and families with the agricultural community, and strengthen markets for Vermont grown and produced products. Over the years, the program has evolved. So the initial funding stream that comes through that $500,000 is now parsed out into 3 separate grant programs. The Farm to School and Early Childhood Capacity Building Grant, the CSA grant, or the Community Supported Agriculture Grant, and the Vision Grant. The CSA grant and the Vision Grant are 2 fairly new programs. They started in 2021. The Capacity Building Grant has been around since basically the beginning of the program, just in slightly different variations and with different titles for what it's called. But the Capacity Building Grant is the flagship funding opportunity. Over half of the $500,000 grant budget goes to this program in terms of grants and technical assistance. And I think that's probably the opportunity that we'll be talking most about today as it relates to this legislation. But just wanted to flag that there are these 3 distinct grants. So the Capacity Building Grant pairs financial assistance with technical assistance and a grant coach, and is really focused on building and sustaining and integrating farm to school into the school culture, into the classroom, into the community, into the cafeteria, as Abby talked about, through the 3 C's approach. And it's really a robust and integrated grant experience for schools and early childhood programs that apply to it. And this past year, we had 14 recipients of that funding, some at the school district, some were groups of early childhood providers, and they've engaged in action planning processes. They've put together an action plan as a team. The team is really the foundation of that grant. And the team involves folks that are educators, administrators, folks from the community. And the idea behind the way that grant is designed is to be focused on building and sustaining capacity in the long term to integrate farm to school, not as an add-on, but as just part of how folks are learning, how kids are learning in their classrooms in early childhood settings. The CSA grant is a mini grant program that reimburses up to 80% of the cost of buying a CSA for early childhood programs and after-school programs. That program has gone really well. Folks really like it. And it's a great opportunity to kind of bring in some of these smaller providers in particular to access supports for farm to school and start buying local food to serve in their programs and to use with kids in different like cooking activities and so on. The Vision Grant is kind of a response to a desire to have something that's a little bit more outside the box and leaves more flexibility for programs. The Capacity Building Grant is quite structured and has many partners involved. The Vision Grant is meant to be a little more, leave room for innovative and impactful ideas that can be scaled and replicated that might be beyond what we're already doing in our programming. So in response to, as I mentioned, I did listen to the testimony that's happened so far on this bill, and there were a couple kind of questions or areas of clarification that I just wanted to start with. One was on eligible applicants and allowable costs. So I did just want to clarify that teachers can apply for the grants as they're currently written and do apply on a regular basis. So the capacity building grant is really the one that I'm talking about here. The capacity building grant, we often do get applications that are led by a school champion, as Abby mentioned, might be a teacher, it could be a garden coordinator. The school district ultimately ends up, in order for them to apply, one of the requirements is that they have to get a letter of support from the principal, they have to get a letter of support from the food service, and they have to put together a farm to school team that includes folks that are in the administration and educators and also folks in the community or students. And the idea behind this approach is that it kind of guarantees a certain level of buy-in so that there's a strength in implementing the project and engaging with all of the technical assistance that's available. And also it makes it more likely that these changes can be really sustained and built into the culture long after the grant period by having a lot of folks engaged in the process. The other thing I wanted to note is that ultimately the school district ends up being the fiscal agent for any of these grant awards that go out to a school. So if a teacher applies from Dummerston School, for example, is the report I've been looking at today. Dummerston School applies for a grant. They have to get the support of their district to submit the application because ultimately Wyndham Northeast is going to be the one to receive those funds and make them available to the school for the projects that their team wants to launch. So just wanted to flag those two items around the requirement that there's letters of support and buy-in across the organization, and then also that ultimately the school district needs to be the fiscal agent for those funds, regardless of who is applying within the school system.
Go ahead, John.
Gina, I don't know if this is a good time to talk about it, but you mentioned not-for-profits are also eligible for this, so
Yeah.
how does it work with them and like who would it be their fiscal agent?
Yeah, good question. So there are within the legislative language, the Rosa McLaughlin Act, there's a note in there around how schools, early childhood programs, and also technical assistance providers serving schools and early childhood programs are eligible for grants. So we administer grants to our technical assistance organizations that are leads on supporting the capacity building grant. So those are Shelburne Farms, Vermont Garden Network, Northeast Organic Farming Association of Vermont, and Hunger Free Vermont. And they are their own fiscal agents, but within a school district, that's just the way that the process works, where money has to go through the district in order to get down to the school level. Sometimes for early childhood programs, it's usually the same as well. An early childhood program usually is their own fiscal agent because they're not within larger structures. But occasionally there will be another outside organization that will be their fiscal agent to support them when managing the grant and dealing with the paperwork associated with that. Yeah. Any other questions? I can also continue on, talk through them.
Yeah, I think we're all set. You can continue.
Okay. So the other eligibility allowable cost clarification I wanted to raise was on the kitchen equipment question. Kitchen equipment is also an allowable cost within the way that the language is written and the way that we've interpreted that and put together our request for applications for the grant program. So a couple examples of that, looking back at our grants that just closed out this past summer, we had 2 grants that went to school districts that had purchased cooking equipment. One was to the Greater Rutland County Supervisory Union. They purchased a cooking cart for 2 of the schools within their district so that they could bring the cooking carts around to different classrooms for different cooking activities. And then in Dummerston School within the Wyndham Northeast, they purchased cooking equipment and tools for within the classroom and also for outdoor cooking activities around the fire. In addition to both of those schools made lots of investments in gardening supplies as well. But just wanted to flag that cooking and gardening supplies are fairly common costs that we see charged to grants. The other kind of topic that I wanted to raise or respond to, I really appreciated Representative Pearl, you had raised a question in that first conversation around curriculum development and what happens when a teacher develops curriculum around farm to school and then maybe they retire. What happens to, just out of concern that there might not be continuity there. And I wanted to kind of share some of the way that the program is structured and the way that some of these different investments are supporting that continuity. So again, wanted to raise the project team approach there, where the way that the capacity building grant team structure works is to really emphasize sustainability and buy-in across the organization. Also wanted to flag, as I mentioned, the technical assistance that grantees receive from different organizations like Shelburne Farms and Vermont Garden Network. They help them prepare and adapt curriculum that will suit their school's needs, and they can also kind of share resources that they've gleaned from working with other schools as part of a benefit to engaging in the grant program. Also flagging a couple other resources that are available to ensure kind of like that best practices are being shared and that curriculum is being shared and that folks are there's coordination statewide about these resources that are available. The Farm to School Network Ease of Use team meets monthly to support farm to school coordinators and kind of troubleshooting and sharing resources and best practices around the state. Harvest of the Month is a packaged curriculum that every Vermont school can tap into, and it's being managed right now by Food Connects. And that packaged curriculum includes recipes, menu resources for school meal preparation of a specific local product for each month in the calendar year. And then also curriculum is provided as well as part of like that package, ready to go resource. And then I believe Representative Cole raised also the Vermont Feed and Shelburne Farms have a curriculum library, a resource library available online that's accessible. And then I also just wanted to flag some investments that are kind of outside of this grant program, but kind of strengthen these efforts. So the Agency of Education developed some farm to school curriculum modules that have been shared, that were generated to be like, there's a webinar, there's some materials, and those were shared and designed to be able to like train statewide different folks that are working at farm to school at different schools. And there's some work happening right now that the Agency of Education is funding again through a USDA farm to school formula grant that they received in this past year to kind of disseminate, get the word out about those resources that were already developed again. So they're hosting regional meetings across the state within the next couple of years to kind of retrain on the modules and connect more local and regional supports for school systems into what's available statewide. So that's all that I had prepared, but just wanted to appreciate all the conversation and effort that's gone into this topic and happy to answer any questions.
Great, thank you. Yeah, Representative Pearl.
Seems like I've created a bill for a problem that there isn't any problem. So, like, but I mean, you addressed all the things that I was trying to address with the bill, so I'm trying to figure out if those pieces that I was thinking or feeling like maybe were constraints, you know, because the ultimate goal here is to increase this program more widely throughout the state, make it more accessible to schools and teachers, especially because we heard obviously testimony in years past of, you know, really passionate people that are doing good work and want to be able to kind of spread that. And I know in my own district, you know, I've got somebody that's felt like there was a barrier to entry maybe, and that may just be either lack of understanding or they may not have been supported in their district. And so I guess my question is, do you have ideas on, is it really just a funding? Like, would just increasing funding, not saying that that's our desire, but if would that be the best avenue to increasing this program? Is it awareness, which sounds like you guys are working on, or is it like what are the amounts of applicants you're getting compared to what you're able to allocate for funds? Are you hearing that it's a difficult process? You know, is it a difficult grant application? You know, just, I guess, wanting to know more about maybe the constraints or how we could, because through our work here, it's just seemed like we were really excited about these programs and schools that do a really good job. And I had introduced previous legislation that was more like a top down, like, let's make sure kids are learning about agriculture. And that felt really like it was not gonna be a good approach, just because, as we all know, schools and teachers and administrations are overwhelmed. So it was like, okay, different approach. Let's see how we can build this from the bottom up and encourage this sort of thing. And this was my attempt at that. And I guess I'm wondering if you guys have ideas that would maybe be more helpful than, because it sounds like a lot of the things that I thought maybe were the constraints really aren't. But I just.
Yeah. I'm happy to start, and I'll also open it up to Abby if you have other ideas, but I think the outreach is really like the area where we can continue to do more to make more folks aware of the opportunity. And I will also name too that there's been more capacity added to the Farm to School network this year. So there's now a network coordinator. So I think there's going to be more capacity for. And there's also these regional meetings that are happening. So I think there's movement on the ground where I think we are going to get to a place where more schools are hearing about the grants and are able to access the support they need to apply or to learn more. But yeah, I do think that outreach and awareness is a major area for improving and reaching more schools.
Are you feeling like you're having to turn a lot of applicants away at this point, or what is the interest level?
Yeah, it varies by the 3 different programs that I named. So for the capacity building grant, we are turning applicants away. And fortunately, though, we're turning folks away and able to turn them to other resources. So if folks aren't able to get a Farm to School capacity building grant this year, we directed them to consider applying for the Northeast Farm to School Institute, which is kind of a complementary, in some ways similarly structured program, just with not a focus on the grant. And for our CSA grant, that one was not fully subscribed, but I think we can just do more for outreach and improving our processes so it's a little more accessible, especially for these smaller home care providers. And then for our vision grant, that one was oversubscribed as well. So yeah, I would say there is interest. Folks are applying that we are turning down, but I think we could still do more to bring in more competitive applications from across the state.
Representative Price and then Representative Cole.
Yeah, so just to expand a little bit, I think we've heard often that Vermont is sort of a leader in farm to school. It was, you know, an early leader in it. And then we also see that like a pretty small number of schools are actually even reaching 10% of local food, right? And so I'm just wondering if you have any thoughts on like really, how do we really take the next steps? What are the roadblocks that are sort of keeping us sort of humming along at this, you know, level that is doing lots of great work, but maybe isn't sort of like expanding beyond the places where there's a really strong champion and some capacity to take on the work or.
It's a really good question. I think I don't have an answer, but I will say that something that I'm excited about this year, as I mentioned, there's this new capacity at the network. And also the Agency of Ag got a grant from USDA in fiscal year 2022 for a local food for schools program, which is currently underway. And that program allocated a certain amount of local food to every single school food authority in Vermont. So, and right now, and paired them with a food hub to procure that food. So essentially, we notified every school food authority. We said, here's the food hub that we've assigned to work with based on your geographic region and their capacity to reach you.
Between $1,000 and $13,000 of free local food waiting for you at this food hub as long as soon as you go and place your order.
Hold on a second, so we can see if we have a technical issue. I think we're okay.
We're still streaming.
Okay, great.
Thank you.
Yeah.
Yeah, no, thank you.
Yeah.
I'm sorry, just a little distracted.
Yeah.
I just hope that we can continue to expand on these conversations because I think there's a lot of excitement. Obviously, there's a lot of passion and excitement at the agency for this work, and there's a lot of excitement in this room, I think, to be expanding. So I hope that we can have more expansive conversations about like how do we work together to really get over that hump and sort of like take the next steps and in continuing to be that leader, you know, on making farm to school not the outlier, but the sort of center programs.
Yeah, absolutely. Yeah, I really appreciate that. And I think projects like this local food for schools that kind of have a lower barrier to entry and they make resources available to every single school district. I think that is gonna the hope with that program is that it's connecting folks to food hubs. Food service directors might realize that they are appreciating the quality of the food, they're appreciating the connection to a local producer, and they'll continue that purchasing relationship after the funds have been fully spent down from that food hub. But I think there are other creative ways, like you said, to increase the geographic reach of the program. And that was part of why the CSA grant was created too, is that capacity building grant is pretty intense. And so there are only going to be a handful of schools that are really, and early childhood programs that are ready to take that on. And so the CSA grant is this mini grant program that's more accessible, especially for new folks. But I think we have the opportunity to continue to evolve the program and create, you know, different funding opportunities, if that makes sense, and adjust the ones that we have to continue to meet those needs. And I appreciate that and happy to kind of brainstorm more. I don't know, Abby, if you have any thoughts to add on this question. I think it's important.
Yeah, I don't know that I do really. I feel like I'd love to hear from the Agency of Education, sort of like what they would say. Because I feel like the school community is so different, kind of like post-COVID, of like if they think it's just taking a while to get like back into the flow of things in the in-person school setting. You know, for the longest time, it was a concern that schools didn't have proper processing equipment or kitchen capacity to be able to really kind of bring in local food and prepare it into meals sufficiently. I honestly don't know if that still feels like one of the greatest barriers. And this is where Agency of Education has so much connection with every school in our state that I feel like they really have a pulse on, you know, like what they're hearing as reasons that there's constraints or restrictions for local food procurement. I think the last piece I would share is that part of the messaging that's come out of the Farm to School Network for years has been that when we increase the quality of food in a school, that increases participation, which then increases the budget that then they have to spend on increasing local food procurement. And, you know, again, with the adoption of universal school meals, I don't actually even know how that all filters out at this point. So I feel like my perspective may be a little antiquated at this point, but those have always been the issues. It's like processing budgets, a lot of turnover, and then kind of just like such a disrupted educational system in the last few years. But you know, do you think that was?
I think those are good points, and I think too, like the way that food hubs have expanded to now reach every single school food authority in Vermont. I think there's a lot of work that's happening to make local food accessible to schools, maybe at a better price point or at a better like distribution schedule than has been available to them in the past. So I'm also hopeful that these connections with food hubs and the way that the food hubs are building a network to serve schools statewide will support more local food access.
Representative Cole.
My question tails off of Mike's pretty well, I think, and it's thinking about these contracts that schools have, and I don't know what percentage it is, but with, you know, larger corporations like Cisco and what's the one we use downstairs?
Reinhardt Sodexo.
Yeah, Abbey Group, Sodexo, yeah, so of course the benefit is that schools lack maybe capacity on the staff end or processing end or whatever it is, and maybe there's some sort of monetary and time gain to having this relationship with this one of these larger organizations. But then on the other hand, you do lose an element of freedom, is my understanding. And I'd be curious to better understand the relationship. I know that these food hubs have tried to do some nudging to work with these groups like Abbey Group to better incorporate local stuff in there, but just, you know, when a school is locked into that contract for 5 years or however many years, and I know Hartford, my district, just I think renewed a 5-year long contract with can't remember, I think it's the Abbey Group actually. You know, how is that limiting perhaps to their ability to interact with Farm to School, or like, oh, we've got this part covered because Cisco's on it, you know, like, is that, I don't know, I'm wondering if that could be the missing piece to going next step. And I know they provide an essential service, which is, you know, expanding a school's ability to have more time to do other things. And it's just streamlining efficiency. But just exploring that area more and maybe the tension that exists between the two, even though I know there's some cooperation too, but I think underneath it all, there's, you know, it's still, we're not maximizing what we could in terms of quality and local re-input into the economy because of these relationships we have with these larger food service providers.
And I don't work too closely with the food service management companies. Connor Floyd at the Agency of Education, he'll be a great person to ask. One thing I will just note is for the local Food for Schools program, which I do manage using this USDA funding, providing that food to food hubs. There have been some challenges that have come up around the funding is going to support the school food authority. And so what happens when the school isn't paying for the food directly, they're paying for the contract. And so it creates specific terms in which those schools that have food service management companies can engage with the program. And ultimately, there have been some school food authorities with food service management companies that have had a hard time accessing that free food that's available just because of the complexities there. But I think Connor could speak to it too with the local foods incentive.
I've been here in 20 minutes. Representative O'Brien.
I just wonder if you could give us some idea of how hands-on grants could be, because I've always had this idea of having worked in school, being a farmer, that if we could have, you know, bees in schools, sugar houses, chicken, you know, and layers. Is that within the realm of this, or could you hire the technical people who might be able to set up those sort of hands-on things at schools?
Good question. I think there's some combination that is happening. So I was reading this report that came in from Dumberston. Part of their grant was they bought a maple evaporator so they're doing some kind of sugaring, processing of maple at their school, which is really exciting. And so it varies a lot based on what kind of knowledge exists within the school system already and what partners they've also pulled into their farm to school team, because they could pull in, you know, someone who has more technical expertise who might be willing to volunteer their time or charge for that service as well. The grant could cover that as long as it's part of their action plan that they've worked on with their coach. So yeah, those are all possibilities that could be funded by the capacity building grant as long as it's within the structure of they go through the action planning and they engage with technical assistance to get support.
Do potentially even add on fundraising.
Yeah, I think, right. I think there are examples of that happening with different school districts.
You gave us some.
I just wanted to add, I think one of the nonprofit kind of service providers that Gina mentioned was the Vermont Garden Network, which is often solicited as a collaborator with schools to help set up school gardens if that's not something that they're already doing. So that's always something that it seems schools and students are really excited about, is like growing the food and having these like real tactile kind of school-based experiences. And so I think it's either supporting that or really, or in addition, connecting them to farms in their community. So they're going to a farm visit and they're seeing when the sugaring operation happens, or going to a beekeeper and, you know, bringing home honey, or, you know, their school serves the maple syrup that's made down the road. So again, it's either a combination or, you know, a set of both of those goals, I think, that many schools are trying to achieve.
That's great. Representative Pearl.
Yeah, I was just curious, I'm thinking, and John's comment to the sugar house is making me think of it, I'm thinking of Danville in my district, I'm wondering about almost the succession planning of programs. Like it feels like sometimes maybe like there are grants or individual people that stand up programs, and then when they leave or the grant ends, the experience or the program kind of dies. Like with Danville, like we've had a sugar house at Danville School for ever, but it's not always, sometimes it's got sporting supplies in it. And, you know, and then it's a sugar house again, and then it's gone. And like, and over the year, and the same with the gardens, like I remember, you know, like there was time when I was in school which was 20 years ago, that was, you know, there was raised beds outside with a bunch of weeds in them. And then, you know, there's been times when there's been a wonderful garden and chickens outside, you know, like, and it just kind of, so I guess, like, I'm wondering, and I don't know if this is more just me trying to raise the awareness around that, or I guess also asking, like, is there any sort of pieces of granting that are about, like, how to build a budget to keep, like how to get funding after the grant? Like, is there any pieces of that as far as from the agency's standpoint of like, how do we keep these programs going? Because it just always feels like it doesn't stick.
Yeah.
You know, if it leaves, you know, obviously funding is always the issue, but like, is there anything around that? Like,
Yeah, I would say for both the capacity building grant and then also for the Northeast Farm to School Institute, which Shelburne Farms offers, both are these project team focused. You have an action plan, you have a coach, and those questions around sustainability after the grant are always part of our final report. And we do hear from folks about what their plans are for next steps. So I think for that ebb and flow is kind of speaks to what Abby had raised earlier, is that sometimes there's a farm to school champion. But if that champion doesn't have a team behind them, doesn't have the resources to engage, that might just naturally happen. So the more that schools that have that interest and have somebody who would be interested in pulling together a team, the more likely they'd be able to build a sustainable farm to school program there.
And I think just to follow on that, like, I think like it feels like with there's so much change, especially with educated schools, like, and I think that's why my, like, the original approach was more top down, because like, doesn't matter. There may be a quality difference in programs through the years in, say, mathematics, but there's always a math program, right? Because it's in if we can't, I mean, I shouldn't say we can't, but if it's gonna be a heavy lift to say there always needs to be nutrition and education in schools, is there a way, I guess, to sustain that with encouragement or granting or anything? I'm sorry, I don't know if that was a question. I think I'm just spewing, but.
So I think they're important. They're important ideas, and I think we should talk more. Like, I want to hear more ideas and kind of brainstorm more again. The way that the grant program is written, we do have flexibility to think about what different funding opportunities could look like in the future and connect with the network. So
I know you shared some numbers, and you could probably wrap up shortly, but in the last granting cycle, whenever that would have been, I think you said there were 14 capacity grants.
Mhm.
And could you tell us how many applicants there might have been, just so we can, understanding what the level of interest is and how well we're able to serve that. And then if you can also tell us something about the numbers of the other categories of grants.
Yeah.
And if it's not a representative here, feel free to say so, but.
Yeah, I don't have the numbers in front of me today, but I will have them on Farm to School Awareness Day, so we can.
to that, if that's okay.
Okay.
Yeah.
Yeah, I think that just having being able to quantify a little bit, how right now with the level of understanding that there is statewide within the community, how much interest is there that we're not able to meet, and then I guess a related question would be if we had more funding. What impact would that have? What impact would it have on the agency's ability to, do its other work? Would we need to, at some point, be thinking about staffing, agency staffing as well? So, are there any other questions, or Abby, did you have anything else that you had wanted to add after listening to the questions?
Yeah, that's a good question around demand and unmet need. I think we could probably even get that to you before the I'm thinking, Representative Cole, of your question around the food service management company relationships, and again, I feel like the Farm to School Network has done a fair bit of relationship building and seeing the fact that we have, 3 to 5 different food service management companies that service schools in Vermont, and offering education to them and talking about the importance of local food and really encouraging them to buy from food hubs and other local producers. And what I don't know, which I think is related to your question, is like, have we seen a marked increase in local procurement by food service management companies over the last 5 years? 10 years. Again, there's a couple of anomalous years in there, but and I don't know that, but I'm hopeful that we can reach out to someone within the Farm to School Network who may have more of that answer.
And Food Connects has provided me with some information on that a little bit, so they would be another good resource.
Yeah.
Representative Wilson.
Is there any way we could have taxpayers represented in here to take testimony of what they can afford? Is that possible to do?
I think you're talking about a larger question, but not specific to this program. Okay, all right. We can have that conversation.
Yeah.
Representative O'Brien.
I mean, thinking along those lines. It's difficult in some ways, I think, because with base budgets. You can't really advocate like, oh, this program would really flower if we had $1 million, you know, whereas if there were outside advocates, maybe all of that, the, you know, Shelburne Farms and the Vermont Garden Networks could come in and say, well, if we had double the money, it would do great, but are there mechanisms? I'm thinking of like universal school meals, if that wasn't fully subscribed and there were surpluses, you know, could we take that surplus and put it into something like this? I'm just thinking, where in government potentially could we find more money for this? That's connected, and it's interesting that there's a relationship already between the AAFM and the Agency of Education, right? Because there's big funding at the AOE, but not so much.
It's a good question. I don't know, Abby, if you have.
Yeah, I
Yeah,
think
it is, yeah.
part of what has been, kind of like the reality around farm to school and farm to institution in a larger capacity, because this is like what happens in our K through 12 system also happens within our hospitals and also happens within our college community and also happens within corrections. Is that there are big systems and there's like lots of levers of influence. And some of it's budget related, some of it is like if we had more resources, we could do more funding, we could do more programming. But oftentimes it's, well, we need more training and capacity at the school. Like, you know, we could have all the money in the world to buy local food, but if the food service directors and nutrition folks in the schools don't have capacity or staffing, then we have to address that. And that's not something that the Agency of Agriculture's grants are going to address. That's something that school budgets probably need to kind of focus on. And then there's, you know, like, you know, school kitchens only have so much capacity, which, you know, we talked about already, but you know, if there's a food service director that really wants to, you know, buy local food from a food hub directly from farmers, and yet they don't have any storage in their kitchen, but they don't have a budget to be able to add on to their kitchen, like what options do they have? That's often when they move to a food service management company because they can prepare the food offsite and bring it in. And then, you know, you think about, there's one other thought I just going to offer that. Yeah, but it's not gonna be.
Well, will farm to school day,
Yeah.
February 8th?
Yes.
That'll be another opportunity to.
Yeah, I think that'll be a great.
Well, thank you, John.
Just that last thought, I
Yeah.
mean, I wasn't even thinking of your farm to institution, which would be sort of another interesting tutorial
About that.
outside of schools, because we don't think so much about
Yeah.
prisons. and-
Yeah, right, I noted that, and yeah, we don't talk about that as much.
Yeah, more processing capacity than
Yeah.
schools do.
Yeah, and different budgets oftentimes.
Okay,
Yep.
good, yeah. So we will have, I think we've set aside a day or a morning, part of a morning next week to have a budget presentation from the agency. So I don't know, Abby, if you're part of that, but we'll be digging in a little bit more to the different programs and what the funding levels are. And then we're actually at 2:00, after a short break, we're going to be talking about the local foods incentive program. So that's why education is going to be in.
Good.
All right, well, why don't we stop there for a few minutes?